Well, greetings folks, your friendly neighborhood Rictus Gate here. In this video I just want to talk a bit about what Gary had to say in his video response to me and my question. Now I have scripted it, and this might be a two-part because I think there's some important things that I really want to try to make clear about my stance, where I stand on a number of these issues. So without further ado, I am going to read what I have written, just to make sure I cover all the bases. So without further ado, here we go. So you start off with answering my question, which was simply, your question to me with something else attached to it. So you asked me, what do you do if you unintentionally wrong someone? So I added on, what do you do? And they refused to grant you that forgiveness. Or something like that. And that's the reason why I asked that. And that'll come up a bit later. Now you answer, what you do is seek grace, which you simply put it, the act of looking to God to give you strength to look for that forgiveness, seek that forgiveness, and face the person you wronged, and the ability for that person, God, to give that person the heart, the strength to grant you that forgiveness. Well, this isn't unique. This is something all of us, I think, struggle with. At least all of us who have a normally functioning brain, and regardless of our beliefs or lack thereof. This is something that we would struggle with, and we do. Because it takes a lot of courage to face those we have wronged. And we are apt to approach the person with positive thoughts and feelings of hope towards an outcome of being forgiven, of course. So that's why you hope that the person will grant you forgiveness. It's just a typical hope. Now I'm capable of doing this as well. Screwing up my courage. Hoping that the person will forgive me. Now I do it because, simply put, I can put myself in the shoes of the one I've wronged. I don't know how else to put it. It just seems that obvious to me. Now, I also believe that this is something one would expect from an individual who is part of a species that has evolved a highly social framework that, it could be argued, is one of the fulcrums of our fitness to survive. Now, in the unfortunate case that some person refuses to grant you that forgiveness, you table an alternative by offering to do a work of prudence on their behalf in order to attain that much sought after grace. We're doing some kind of charity work or volunteering in some way to help the community. Now this is one of those places where I scratch my head. A work of prudence is a laudable act, no matter what, of course. And it might make you feel better in some way, but I don't see how it bridges that gap of not receiving forgiveness. Maybe the hope in doing such a thing is to demonstrate to the one you've wronged that, well, you ain't all that bad after all. But I must point out, if that person still refuses to grant forgiveness, you are, ultimately speaking, off the hook as a believer via the forgiveness of God. So you can go about your day none the worse for the situation, since you did what you could, including seeking the forgiveness of God, which, according to the teachings that I understand, and alluded to in the scriptures I quoted, is of penultimate importance. And this sentiment, placing the wants and needs of a single individual, no matter who or what that individual is, over and above those of your fellow human, to me, smacks of being immoral. More on that later. And a second thing is actually more of a question. What in your mind precludes me from making the same work of prudence with a secular organization or of my own making? The point is, I as a non-believer am stuck with the thorn in my conscience of not being forgiven indefinitely. Well, you, as a believer, have the option of opening the door to the forgiveness of God. So, if this theology holds, the believer has heaven to look forward to when they die, even if the person they wronged does not grant forgiveness. And let's say, for argument's sake, it was me who was wronged. Well, my ultimate destiny is whatever punishment God sees fit to mete out in my stubborn mind. And do you see anything amiss here? Ethically speaking, that is. No, this idea that the forgiveness granted by God is over and above that of your fellow human basically annuls any human sentiment in the matter. And to me, without human sentiment, there is no such thing as morality as we know it to be. Another scenario could be both of you wind up in heaven. That is, if not granting forgiveness isn't considered a transgression or sin, of course. What then? Does God act as a mediator between you two? Are the memories of the people wiped clean so there is no record of slight committed and forgiveness held back? Or maybe being in the presence of God makes our previous earthly life pale in comparison so much that it isn't worth thinking about. Which makes me wonder why some theists, William Wayne Craig is pretty big at this, have such issues with the possibility of there being no ultimate purpose or consequence to life, the universe, and everything. Because to me, his theology speaks of just such a thing, that is, William Wayne Craig's, that there is no ultimate purpose, even with his God. There are so many questions that are raised when you posit this, and really only speculations to work with, in my opinion. It's just a quick aside. Now, I fully recognize the psychologically detrimental effects from hanging on to hate or clinging to a grudge and not forgiving someone. You can watch Capricious Black Box's video on that. I'll leave a link below. So I'm not saying that a person who refuses to forgive is necessarily doing a good thing either. The best advice I can give is to forgive those who have wronged you, even if it is just for your own psychological health and well-being. So your next point is very interesting as well. Now, correct me if I'm wrong, but you state that you asked me that question to see what my response would be because, quote, people in the secular worldview don't necessarily have to seek recompense from the person they've wronged. There's nothing in their teachings that says they have to, whereas in Christianity there is. Well, the former portion of this statement I can agree with in part at least. There's so many different teachings out there, and some probably don't include seeking forgiveness. But at the risk of coming across as being condescending or insulting, which is not my intention at all, isn't this one of the marks of being an adult? That you know that you no longer need someone or something to prod you to do the right thing? It is to me. Now, the latter point I find more questionable, I guess. You seem to be ignoring the many philosophies and ethical frameworks that have been developed by those who espouse a secularist view, and this has been occurring for thousands of years. From the individual philosophers to more formalized efforts like humanism, which endeavors to summarize a secularist view in a very succinct and easily understood way. It also includes an ethic which is a wonderful distillation of the more praiseworthy moral norms found around the world, whether they are secularist or religious. Now, as for the last part, the whereas in Christianity there is such a teaching, firstly, as noted above, in Christian teaching, that you worry should ultimately be for how your God feels about things. This also seems rather naive. Once again, no intention of insult, just an observation. I just don't see how that actually makes any difference at all. It's still up to the individual to actually have the desire to carry out the act in the first place, regardless of what the rules say. Just a quick aside, another one. I don't know why, but this just came to mind. It seems to me that those who take issue with the good news Christ on the cross. The secularists, if you will, do so in part because they feel that the principle behind the story, the death of an innocent in the place of the guilty, is immoral and repugnant, to say the least. Makes me wonder. Although they might not have anything to point to buttress this sentiment, I don't. I would argue that the fact of this is plain on the face of it. The fact of the immorality is plain. There are even some theists who find this idea hard to swallow, but do so nonetheless. And that is more troubling to me. Well, thus ends part 1 of my response. Sorry, it's going to be a two-parter. I guess I have a lot to say about this. So in the second part, I'll cover more the scriptures that I quoted and your critique of them, as well as some other stuff. So until then, salut.